Hello everyone, greetings once again from the grimdark 41st millennium. The Bolter. I know in my last Big 40k Armory video I said that the chainsword was the most distinctive iconic weapon in 40k, in my opinion. But the Bolter is definitely up there. With its distinctive profile, anyone who's familiar with the game has seen this gun. After all, it's the main weapon of the series' mascots, the genetically engineered superhuman space marines, as well as their badder counterparts, the Chaos Space Marines. It's also a favorite of normal human officers and political enforcers in the Imperium, and of course the main gun of the Nuns with Guns, the Sisters of Battle. Story-wise, this is an expensive weapon, carried only by the most elite, but due to the large number of elite human factions in the game, it's actually the most common weapon on the tabletop. Looking at this gun, you might not think there's a lot to it. Just a ridiculously bulky, boxy-looking automatic rifle. But anyone who knows the setting of this sci-fi game knows that the Bolter isn't your typical firearm. The main thing that sets it apart, it fires high-caliber rocket-propelled bullets. Sounds pretty crazy, doesn't it? An over-the-top weapon for an over-the-top setting. Well, believe it or not, that actually already exists. That's right, a gun that fires rocket-propelled bullets has already been tested by the military and sold to civilians in the United States of America. Say hello to the Gyrojet. Yes, the science fiction technology of the far future is available today, thanks to the most innovative, cutting-edge technology of 1968.
We've got the perfect weapon. We've got the perfect weapon.
You heard right. The basic idea for this cool, fancy space gun was already invented nearly 2 decades before the fictional version. I like science fiction because of writers' uncanny ability to predict the future using only their imaginations. Rick Priestley, creator of much early 40k background, had probably heard of this weapon and decided to swipe the idea for his writing. In fairness, a Bolter is a lot more sophisticated of an idea than the Gyrojet, the real-life version. But the basic concept is the same. Aside from some possible fancy fictional metal used to build the thing, all the technology already existed before disco. So why don't as many people know about the Gyrojet as know about the Bee Gees? To understand this, we're going to need to look at the history and the workings of the gun. The Gyrojet was invented primarily by Robert Mainhart with the help of his friend Nick Minchakjevic and Art Beal, who helped develop the ammunition. Together they formed the company MBA Associates, or MBA for short, which worked exclusively on Gyrojet guns and technology. Minchakjevic in particular had big dreams for the technology, wanting to get product placement in Hollywood and make the gun, as he put it, more famous than the Colt Peacemaker. In fact, he approached Gene Roddenberry and tried to convince him to have his characters carry the gun on a little project he was working on called Star Trek. Roddenberry tested out and actually loved the gun, but ultimately decided he wanted a ray gun instead. Yeah, put that in your pipe and smoke it. There's a parallel universe where everyone in Star Trek uses bolters, but Minchakjevic's Hollywood adventures weren't over. While he failed with Roddenberry, he actually succeeded at getting the Gyrojet put in a spy film called Murderer's Row, as well as a novelization of The Man from U.N.C.L.E. and a cameo in You Only Live Twice with James freaking Bond. The Gyrojet wasn't considered quite futuristic enough for the taste of 60s Hollywood sci-fi, but it found a little niche in spy thrillers. Sadly for the men of MB Associates, despite all of this, the Gyrojet was not a commercial success. Between 4,000 and 5,000 of the Mark I and II pistols were sold to civilians, not enough to make a profit on the money and labor invested in the project. They weren't very practical for civilian use, and were largely just a curiosity for rich collectors. MB Associates set their hopes on a military contract. They actually had several military tests performed, and a small handful of Gyrojet pistols were even taken to Vietnam. But their efforts flopped, and the military ultimately wasn't interested. The carbine and rifle never made it out of the prototype stage. So why did the military reject the weapon? Well, why were they interested in it in the first place? To answer these questions, we're going to have to look at the gun itself. We're going to have to look at how the Gyrojet actually works and what the advantages and disadvantages of it were. Along the way, I'll also do a comparison with the bolter and look at if the differences would make either gun more effective than the other. Now, this is the part where, if I were rich and cool, I would pull out my very own Gyrojet, take a look at all the parts for you, and maybe even go out into the desert and shoot off a round or two. Unfortunately, I'm not rich and cool, and the Gyrojet is a rare and expensive gun, and the rounds alone can cost over $100. That's over $100 for one shot. And they don't even work all the time. This is ammo from the 60s. So because of that, I'm going to be using footage from cooler and more well-connected YouTube channels. And be aware when I play footage of the gun being shot that that's over $100 right there on the screen, so appreciate it. As always, the channels the footage came from will be credited in the captions. First off, let's talk about the good stuff. The good people, the people over at 1D4chan actually wrote a fairly lengthy page about the bolter, where they actually talk about the Gyrojet in a little bit of detail. They mention increased range as being a big selling point for the Gyrojet over a conventional firearm. That's really only partially true though. Rocket-propelled bullets reach a greater speed than bullets fired from a conventional gun, which means that yes, in theory, they could travel farther. However, the effective range of the Gyrojet, that is, the range at which it could actually hit the target it was aiming at, was actually a bit less than the effective range of a conventional firearm. We'll get to why the gun had accuracy issues in a minute, but for now, let's just say that that was something that both the military and MB Associates were well aware of, and they knew that this technology had a ways to go before there would actually be a range advantage to using such a weapon. The real big selling point of the gun was power. A Gyrojet pistol fires a 51 caliber bullet that at peak velocity travels at roughly twice the speed of a conventional 45 caliber bullet. The higher caliber and faster speed means that you're going to get a lot more penetration on that bullet against hard targets. And this was the main interest of the American military in the project. They wanted to use the Gyrojet as an armor-piercing weapon. Another two advantages that are often overlooked are the weapon's weight and recoil. See, when a conventional round is fired, a small explosion is set off in the chamber, and the gun has to be built to withstand that force. It's a lot more stress on the parts, it's a lot more wear and tear. With a Gyrojet, or any gun that uses rocket-propelled ammo in theory, the only stress it really needs to endure is the jet fuel burning and venting out the back. Because of this, the gun could be built with much more lightweight materials. The Gyrojet was actually built using a zinc metal alloy. And the metal was kind of thin compared to conventional firearms. Now, that doesn't mean it was fragile against just holding it in your hands or dropping it, but it didn't have to withstand an explosion inside. So that meant that it could be built a lot more lightweight. And because, again, the gun wasn't absorbing the recoil from an explosion being set off, but just, a little bit of jet fuel burning and venting out the back, there's almost no recoil to the gun when it fires. A lot of people that have handled and shot the Gyrojet say it actually feels a lot more like a toy than a real gun. When you compare this to a conventional gun that fires 50 caliber ammo, it's just insane. And the bolter takes this idea and carries it even further. This is a gun that can fire full auto and semi-auto burst. So for comparison, let's look at the M2 Browning, a full auto 50 caliber weapon that's too big for one person to use while walking around. It has to be mounted on a tripod. By the contrast, we know the bolter can be carried around and used by a normal human without any augmentations or special gear. And this isn't really a fair comparison, because again, the M2 fires 50 caliber bullets. The bolter actually fires 75 caliber bullets. And after they hit the target, they explode. Because of course they do. So the military was interested in the Gyrojet because it suddenly made it possible to make a much more powerful gun much lighter weight. So why did they turn it down? It sounds awesome, right? Well, I've already mentioned the accuracy issues, and these were kind of inherent to the nature of the gun. See, the Gyrojet bullets function fundamentally differently than a conventional bullet. In a conventional bullet, again, that explosion goes off in the chamber, and that's the primary force that propels the bullet. So it's going at peak speed, leaving the barrel, and then it gradually slows down as it travels. With the Gyrojet, the gun actually starts off relatively slow leaving the barrel as the jet fuel vents out the back, and then it picks up speed as it gains momentum, the further out it travels, until about 60 feet out, when all its fuel would be expended, and that would be the peak velocity of the bullet. Because the bullet was traveling so slowly out of the barrel, the normal rifling that they would put in a conventional firearm, that is, the grooves inside of the gun barrel that would send the bullet into a spin, which would actually keep it traveling in a straight line due to centrifugal force, that didn't work. The bullet just wasn't traveling fast enough for it to spin fast enough to keep it going straight. Now, the team at MB Associates actually figured out a way to make the bullet spin fast enough exiting the barrel to keep it going straight. They used these distinctive slanted holes on the side. What that does is when the air pressure is expended out of those holes, it actually causes this sort of vacuum effect, which makes the bullet spin. It's very complex, but since they figured out how to do that, that solved the problem of the bullet traveling straight, right? Well, only mostly. See, the bullet was still leaving the barrel going very slowly. In fact, it had to travel several feet before it reached terminal velocity. This means that if you fired a Gyrojet gun at a completely unarmored person at point-blank range, the bullet would literally just bounce off them, and maybe give them a nasty bruise. It also means that during that brief time when the bullet just exits the barrel and is still traveling fairly slowly, it was still very vulnerable to outside conditions that could knock it off course. Something as simple as a gust of wind could actually blow the bullet off course during that brief time after it had exited the barrel while it was still building up speed. Those holes running along the side that were necessary to help the gun shoot straight were also a liability. In fact, in a later production run of the gun, due to a manufacturing error, one of those holes got partially sealed up. This caused the bullets from later production runs of the gun to corkscrew through the air when they were fired. Of course, this had a terrible effect on the gun's accuracy. So if the gun was taken out in the mud and the dirt and the other elements, it could get all kinds of gunk in there, and it would just completely ruin the weapon's ability to shoot straight. The bolter actually wouldn't have all of these problems, though. Why not? Well, you see, according to the lore, the bolter is actually a hybrid gun. Bolter bolts have the rocket propulsion of a Gyrojet, but they also pack a powder charge, like a conventional weapon. Because it's going to be leaving the barrel a lot faster thanks to that powder charge explosion, it's going to be lethal at point-blank range, first of all, especially when it explodes, and normal rifling is going to work just fine for getting it to travel straight. Now, you can see a couple of holes on the barrel of the bolter, but that's not really the same thing as the holes along the chamber and barrel of a Gyrojet. These are just compensators, something that's found in a lot of machine guns to help them deal with recoil. We're not done yet with the Gyrojet's issues, though, because now I gotta talk about how the thing is reloaded, because it's pretty terrible, actually. With a normal gun with a detachable magazine, reloading is fairly simple. You take the gun, eject the empty magazine, you take another magazine that you're going to have preloaded, of course, put it in the gun, you're ready to go. It takes a couple of seconds. But a Gyrojet does not have a detachable magazine. This means that anytime you want to reload the gun, the top of the gun has to be opened, and then each bullet has to be put in individually. It didn't have a clip or anything either that would help make sliding all the bullets in at once easier. But oh, that is not the worst part. The worst part is that the Gyrojet had no feed lips. These little tabs that hold the bullet in place while the spring is constantly pushing the bullets up to feed the next one into the firing chamber. The only thing holding those bullets into place on a gyrojet was the top of the gun while it was closed. Of course, you got to open the gun up to reload it. So when loading the gyrojet, what you had to do was hold your thumb over the topmost bullet because it was kept wanting to pop out due to the spring pushing on it, and then push the other one in underneath it, all while holding them firmly into place to make sure that the bullets don't get pushed out and scatter anywhere. Because if your grip slips for a second, that's what's going to happen. The bullets are all going to pop out and scatter all over the ground. Now, if that sounds difficult and annoying, imagine doing it in the jungle while you're being shot at. You might be getting a picture right now of why the US Armed Forces turned down the gyrojet for the war in Vietnam. It's a baffling design choice for a weapon intended for military use. I could only really think of a couple of reasons they would do this. The first possible reason is that the gyrojet ammunition actually wouldn't feed properly into the gun with a normal magazine with feed lips. But I wasn't able to find any source saying that was the case, or if it was, why that would be. Second possibility is that it was just beyond the skills of the gunsmiths the MB associates had working for them. This was a company that had difficulty getting funding throughout its entire existence. And magazines are actually one of the most notoriously complicated parts of a gun to make. They're one of the easiest to mess things up if you get them wrong. The way the gyrojet's bullet feeding works is actually a lot simpler than a detachable magazine with feed lips, but again, it's just not a very good practical design for military use. And this is another problem that the gyrojet has that the bolter doesn't have, because the bolter just has a normal removable magazine. Like the gyrojet really should have had if its makers wanted it to be more competitive for the military. So right now you might be thinking, oh wow, it sounds like the bolter fixes every major problem with the gyrojet. And that's kinda true, but it all comes at a cost. All the changes of the bolter over the gyrojet would serve to make it heavier, more complex to produce, and therefore more expensive. Also, with the bolter rounds having a normal powder charge that would go off to launch them out of the gun, that causes some serious potential safety issues. If it's not done just right, that powder charge going off could set off the rocket fuel in the bullet and also set off the explosive charge, blowing out the gun and possibly injuring the shooter. Basically, it might even be possible to make a gun that would work like this today, but it would be ridiculously expensive, and it would have to be done very carefully to not make the gun a danger to the person using it. And considering how important reliability and ease of manufacture is in a good military firearm, it's questionable whether any militaries will ever have a serious interest in rocket-propelled small arms again. It all kind of comes up to what amount of firepower is necessary, and if there are other weapons that can do the job better for cheaper. As it is, the gyrojet is the closest thing we've ever had to a real-life bolter, and it's a mostly failed experiment and a weird little footnote in firearms history. As always, I hope you enjoyed the video. If you feel like I got something wrong and want to chew me out for it, comment section is right down below. Also, if you enjoyed, please subscribe. That'll be all for now, guys. You have a great one. Those holes running along the side of the gun were also a liability. Those holes running along the side that helped the gun Those holes running along the side that helped the gun But Machiavic's... Yeah, just gonna turn this off for now and finish recording when I can actually speak properly.